There was a night, not long after they moved into the new apartment, that she was restless and sleep did not come easily. She closed her eyes and imagined that the hum of traffic on the street below was the wind in the pines, and there was a taste of salt on her tongue. Eventually she slept, and she dreamt that they still lived in the old house with its faded weatherboard and shingle roof, and that the children were still babies, and he was young, and so was she. Daylight crept through the high city building, and a shaft of sunlight touched the wall beside her, waking her. The sounds she heard were city sounds, rush-hour traffic and sirens, and the cooing of pigeons on the windowsill, and the taste in her mouth was sad and bitter. She remembered that it was their wedding anniversary, and she knew that he would not. After breakfast, after she had turned on the television so that he could watch the news, she took their wedding photo from the shelf and removed it from its frame so that she touched the matte finish of his face and traced the outline of his jaw. And she remembered that he used to be as restless as the hair that curled over his collar. She had thought once that they would stay like that forever. She didn't hear him roll his wheelchair over to her, and his voice startled her. "Checking to see how much better looking I used to be?" Sunlight touched his hair, now filament fine, and his skin wrapped his face loosely like paper, folded and creased, his cheekbones sharp and white beneath. She was at once reminded of a kite he had made for their daughter. It was a small ivory triangle of paper, bound and crossed by bamboo struts, and Beth had run across the sand with the kite string wrapped around her fingers, and he had stood on the shoreline and called out, "Run, run, run like the wind!" And Beth had run on fat little legs, and she'd fallen, and the kite lost its momentum and crashed beside her, its paper torn and spoiled, and the bamboo struts bent and broken on the sand. "Don't cry," he'd said to Beth, "we'll fix it." Back then, he could fix anything. Now his voice pulled her back from the broken kite lying in the sand. He reached out a hand, his good hand, and took the photo from her. "What are you thinking?" "How young we were, how in love we were." "Thinking like that is damn, Dalmatian, oh damn it, damn and blast and damn again." His frustration exploded as it often did these days, when the broken corner of his brain denied him a word or confused him. Once his words fell fast and light like leaves on air, but now they came thickly, as if he were speaking into fog, and he wept easily at his ineptitude. She rubbed his hand. "It's all right," she said, "it's fine. The word you want is dangerous. Thinking is dangerous. Is that what you wanted to say?" "Yes, dangerous." He said the word slowly, as if it were new to him. "You mustn't think like that if it makes you sad." "I'm thinking how we used to be," she said. "We had such fun, didn't we, when the kids were little and you were teaching, and I wasn't very good at keeping that big old house as tidy as your mother thought I should. Remember?" He smiled his lopsided smile. "I remember. You loved me then." "I still love you." He looked down at the photo in his hand. "As much as you did then?" She hesitated, unsure of what to say, and then said nothing. He turned the photo so that the sun fell on their youthful, laughing, happy faces. "Did you love me more when I had more hair? I used to have a lot of hair, and you're heavier now." "Of course I'm heavier. I'm older. I've had two kids." She knew she sounded offensive, hated that she sounded so. "I love you more now than I did then," he said. "There's more of me to love," she tried to laugh. "Remember, I'm meeting Brown at 11. I'll be gone for a couple of hours, but the girl from Homemade will be in to help you shower and get your lunch." "Which girl comes today?" he asked. "Jennifer, the tall one, the one you like." "You're jealous." "Of course, she's young and pretty. She's got a whole life ahead of her, and she flirts with you." She brushed her fingers gently over his hair before turning away. "Do you want anything before I go and beautify myself for Brown?" "Why don't you beautify yourself for me?" he asked. He struggled with the word beautify so that it sounded tarnished and ugly. "Because you've seen me at my worst, because I'm comfortable with you, because I don't have to impress you, because it doesn't matter anymore." "Tell me again why you're seeing Brown?" You and I, we're making provisions for the grandchildren, remember? We're putting money in trust. The papers are ready for signing, that's all." But it wasn't all, and she knew she would never tell him that sometimes she needed no excuse to see Brown. He had a first name, Leonard, but Brown was what she called him, what she'd always called him. And when she was with Brown, she felt young again, alive again. She wouldn't tell him that she laughed with Brown, and once she cried with Brown, and that sometimes when Brown touched her hand or her shoulder, she felt the way she hadn't felt for months, before the stroke stole away her joy. "I miss you when you're not here," he said. "I know." Once she'd wanted to spend all her time with him. Once she'd been jealous of everything that took him from her, his work and his students, even the house that consumed so much of him. with its leaky roof and overgrown garden. Now she wished there were others to share him with, the children of friends from long ago. I have to get ready or I'll be late. For Brown. Yes, for Brown. She wheeled him to the window, left him staring out over the tall city buildings, the grey and brown and black of cement and brick and steel. She wondered if he hated the view as much as she did, if he wished as she did, that they were still living in the old house, where the sea breathed endlessly in front of them, where a path flattened by their footsteps meandered through the pine barrens to a strip of white sand flecked with sandpipers. She remembered how their skin had always tasted of salt, and their hair was infused with the faint metallic smell of seagrass and kelp, and she had never believed that age and illness would rob them of all that. She left him and went into the bedroom, where she piled her hair, now lustreless and streaked with grey, on top of her head, and she thickened her eyelashes with mascara and added a touch of red to lips that had once been soft and full, but now were tight and thin. She splashed a drop of cologne on her wrists. I'm beautifying myself for Brown, she thought, and washed the cologne off her wrists and wiped away the lipstick. He was still looking out of the window when she returned to the living room. She pointed to a distant speck of green. Look, you can see the trees in the park. They're beginning to bud. When it's warmer, we'll go down there and have a picnic beside the lake. She picked up her purse and put on her jacket and kissed him softly on his cheek. I'll bring you back something nice from the bakery. What would you like? Whatever you want, he said. She almost reminded him then that it was their anniversary, that she had missed his flowers, that she used to bake a cake. But I'll see you soon, was all she said. Her hand was on the door when he called her name. She paused, caused by the uncertainty in his voice. What is it? He had turned his chair so that he faced her, and she saw that he still had the photo in his hand. I wish you didn't have to leave. Someone has to sign the papers, she said, and was immediately sorry for the resentment in her voice. Jennifer will be here soon, so you won't miss me. Hurry home, he said. She blew him a kiss, and he put out his hand, caught it and placed it against his cheek and held it there. The wedding photo fluttered to the floor and lay face up on the carpet. Outside, the sidewalks were filled with young men with wild dark hair falling in their eyes, with thick blonde hair gelled into spikes, with shaved heads turned pink in the spring sunshine. They hurried past her on strong legs, pumping the air with muscled arms. How handsome they were, how male and strong and young. She wondered if he was watching from the window high above. Perhaps he could see her crossing the street and was comparing her to the young women rushing by. Svelte young girls with firm high breasts, girls who swayed their slim hips with naive allure. How beautiful they were, how unself-conscious and young. Brown met her at the door of his office, and she was surprised, as she always was when she saw him, at his height, how straight and strong he looked. He took her hand and kissed her on the cheek. It was a friendly kiss, but his hand lingered just a little long in hers. She sat down, and with the wide expanse of his oak desk between them, he became professional again and pulled out the file that held the papers for her to sign. They're lucky kids, your grandkids, he said, going over the figures with her. No worries about college fees for them. Let's hope they do you proud. They will, she said, and signed the papers. His hand touched hers when he took the pen from her, and she noticed that age was beginning to show in the folds of his knuckles, that arthritis had twisted the shape of his thumb, and she felt unaccountably betrayed. I don't have another client this afternoon, he said. Will you come for lunch with me? It's still early, so we can take our time, perhaps even have a glass of wine. Isn't that crossing professional boundaries? She laughed, teasing just a little. Not if it's a business lunch. I'll even charge you for it if it makes you feel better. He played her game, and for a moment she wanted to tell him it was her anniversary, that lunch could be a celebration of sorts. I don't have to be home until 2, she said instead. She followed him into the elevator, and the doors closed. She smelled dark chocolate and the warm, earthy smell of his wool suit, and a bitterness like almonds caught in her throat. She remembered a long time ago when the children were still babies and her marriage was not going well, and she had raged against her husband for a reason now forgotten. There was a man then, tall and strong and young, who had smelled of almonds and tasted of pralines, and he had worn a charcoal suit that smelled of earth, and it had been the briefest of affairs, over before it had begun. She looked at Brown and felt uncomfortably old, uncomfortably guilty. Let's walk through the park, Brown said. It's a beautiful day and I could do with some sun. She followed him through the wrought iron gates, and she breathed in the sweetness of new grass and the scent of lilacs and damp loam. Children, free from the heavy winter clothes, ran sprite-like on the grass, throwing balls or skipping rope, and young women, mothers or nannies or both, sat on benches in groups of 2 or 3, laughing and watching the children. She looked over the trees and in the distance saw the building where she lived, a brown and grey high-rise and a mass of brown and grey high-rises. She counted down from the roof to find the floor on which they lived, but her counting was interrupted by the clear voice of a child. "Hey, Daddy, it's flying, it's flying!" A girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, ran past her with a kite. It was a robust kite made of nylon, twin triangles of red and yellow held in place by plastic struts, and it fluttered above the girl's head, its long tail curling and dipping behind it. "Let the string out slowly," the father said, and ran beside her, and they were both laughing, the girl and her father, as the kite rose, then dipped and looped and fell to the ground. It didn't break. It was built of sturdy stuff and made to endure multiple flights and crashes. The father picked it up and straightened the tail, then took the girl's hand, and they ran with it against the wind. The kite fluttered and hesitated, and she thought it would crash again, but a sudden gust of wind held it, lifted it until it was above the treetops. She caught up with Brown, who was watching her watching the kite. "I have to go," she told him, not looking into his eyes, but at a spot above his ear where his dark hair had turned to wire and grey. "I can't have lunch with you. I have to go home. I'm sorry." She didn't wait for his response, but turned and walked back towards the street and into the lunchtime crowd. Behind her, she heard Brown call her name. She flagged down a cab and gave directions to her apartment, but stopped the cab outside the bakery instead. She smiled at the girl behind the counter and pointed to a cake, chocolate iced with curlicues of green and white, then changed her mind and bought instead some butter tarts. He had always liked butter tarts.